that a lot of these altcoiners, they're kind of into following some leader. They want to hear what some billionaire or what some celebrity says. You know, they're waiting for a next celebrity pump, or they're waiting for, you know, Lindsay Lohan to endorse their, you know, their altcoin, and some silly thing like that. And I feel like Bitcoin is the true anarchist money. I mean, look, Steve Wozniak came out a couple of days ago or yesterday or whenever, said something good about Bitcoin, but so what? We don't care. It's not like, you know, it's like, cool, yeah, we're happy Steve Wozniak said something positive about Bitcoin, but I think some Bitcoiners were like, well, have you fucking bought any? Don't just say something positive, go out and buy some. That's the, you know, so we don't really care who you are. We don't care if you're Elon Musk. We don't care if you're the richest man in the world. We don't care if you're the biggest movie star. If you say something stupid about Bitcoin, we're going to tell you to have fun staying poor.
Welcome to the Tucson Bitcoin podcast. My name is Alex, and today my guest is Bitcoin Motorist. And I'm really excited about this conversation. We got into a bunch of topics about Bitcoin and its relation to liberty, and I probably talked about in the podcast. I'm, affiliated with the Arizona Libertarian Party and the Mises Caucus, and sometimes get frustrated by their lack of interest in Bitcoin, which is okay, but Bitcoin Motorist is doing a great job of getting out into the liberty sphere, as I'm trying to do, and really teaching people about Bitcoin. And he did a bunch of great stuff at PorcFest. He's always pretty active there, and I really appreciated what he did out there and some of the talks that I listened to online. Hopefully get out to PorcFest. But yeah, hope you enjoy this conversation. Cool, we're recording. Good to have you on, Patrick. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, so I have listened to you a bit in the Dirtbags group. I don't really participate a ton, but I like to listen to you guys on Friday nights. And then you did some really cool stuff at PorcFest
Sure.
recently. So I'm excited to talk about that, have you on the podcast. But yeah, so I'm kind of interested to hear about what's going on in New Hampshire with the Free State movement and what that's all about.
Yeah.
What you're doing out there?
Yeah, it's I guess I'm the right person to ask, because I'm part of the Free State Project. I actually I kind of I rediscovered Bitcoin and the Free State Project at around the same time. I first heard about Bitcoin in 2011. But if you had asked me about it in 2012, I probably wouldn't have said, I don't know what Bitcoin is. So I kind of heard about it in 2011, kind of forgot about it, then rediscovered it in 2013. Same thing with the Free State Project. I kind of heard the word, the Free State Project, sometime back in the day. I'm not sure when. Could have been 2003, could have been 2004. I'm not sure when I heard it. And then I didn't really forget about the Free State Project, but I kind of thought that it was just kind of an idea that died. Like I didn't think it went anywhere. And then I rediscovered it in 2013. Around the same time that I rediscovered Bitcoin at a Bitcoin conference. So there were some Free Staters that actually went to a Bitcoin conference. One of the first big Bitcoin conferences was in 2013 in San Jose. I think it was called the Future of Payments Conference. So I went to that conference, and I kind of, ran into some Free Staters, and I was like, oh, a Free State Project. I'm like, yeah, I think I've heard of you guys. You guys, it's that movement to move 20,000 libertarians to Vermont, right? And they were like, no, it's actually New Hampshire. And I'm like, oh, okay. That sounds pretty cool. And then I was talking to them. I'm like, so you moved to New Hampshire for this project? And the guy, it was Ian Freeman I was talking to, I believe. And Ian Freeman was like, yeah, I moved from Florida to New Hampshire. And I was a little bit surprised, again, because I had heard of the Free State Project once, like way back in the day, didn't hear about it again. So as far as I knew, it was just kind of a thought experiment. I didn't know it was an actual project with people who were actually moving to a state. And then when I went home from the conference, I kind of looked into New Hampshire, and I looked into the Free State Project, and everything I read was positive, because I think I had this preconceived notion, especially back in the day, that because I heard the word libertarian, I thought that it had something to do with the Libertarian Party. I found out that it actually has nothing to do with the Libertarian Party, which is kind of a good thing. Mm-hmm. Because you have the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire and you have the Free State Project, and there has been some tension between the two groups, but it looks like the Free State Project won that war. So, I mean, Free State Project, for all the criticism that Bitcoiners give the Free State Project, a lot of it is very legitimate. The people who are really active in the Free State Project are getting shit done here. So one of the reasons why I decided to move to New Hampshire was because there were so many Bitcoiners in the Free State Project, and I was interested in Bitcoin, and I had just discovered libertarianism really, and so there was this ATM company. I think it was called. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the company. It was called Lamasu or something like that. The guys who were running that company, I think they're from Europe, but they moved to New Hampshire for the Free State Project. Ian Freeman and Mark Edge, the guys from Free Talk Live, they were huge Bitcoiners. So I'm looking, and other people like Derek J. Freeman, big into Bitcoin. So it's like a lot of the Free Staters that I was familiar with were big time Bitcoiners. So I was excited. I'm like, I want to go hang out with the Bitcoiners and the Anarchists over in the Free State Project. So, but it's kind of gone a different direction now. There was a little bit of a split, I guess, after 2016. So it seems like a lot of the Free Staters, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's certainly Bitcoin maximalists who are Free Staters, and I know a lot of them, but most of them are these multi-coiners. I don't want to say shitcoiners, but they're multi-coiners. They don't, or they see Bitcoin as, some of them are outwardly hostile to Bitcoin. People like Joel Valenzuela. Joel Valenzuela was one of the first Free Staters I met once I moved here to New Hampshire. I kind of ran into him at a meetup here in the Seacoast area of New Hampshire, and I had known him from Twitter. So it was, and this guy at the time, back in 2016, he was living unbanked. He was living completely on Bitcoin. So to me, Joel was a hardcore Bitcoiner, and I actually talked to Joel to try to figure out, I was like, what if I wanted to do what you did? I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I could pretty much pay for everything in Bitcoin if I wanted to. I'm like, but the one thing is gas. I'm like, how do you pay for gas with Bitcoin? Because I couldn't figure out a way to do it easily. And he kind of told me how. He was like, oh, it's pretty easy. You can go get a gift card for Irving Oil, and then there's Irving Oil gas stations here in the Northeast. So you can just use that, and you can buy Bitcoin with you could buy the Irving Oil card with Bitcoin. So, but then Joel was one of the first people to just immediately lash out and start attacking Bitcoin in 2017. Maybe it was because of his circumstances, maybe because he was just living 100% on Bitcoin at the time. And for him, if he had a bunch of really small transactions, really small UTXOs in his wallet, and he wanted to make a big payment, he would have to pay a huge fee because all those, UTXOs would have to be consolidated. So people like Joel were one of the first to, and now Joel is completely hostile to Bitcoin. If you hear him speak about it, he talks about how it was taken over by Blockstream and things like that. So my goal as part of the Free State Project is not just to make New Hampshire the freest state, which we're working on, and we're going to be successful doing that. But my goal is to make sure that Bitcoiners see New Hampshire as an option to move to, because this is a great state to live at. A lot of Bitcoiners are talking about Wyoming, but I think maybe back in 2013, 2014, a lot of Bitcoiners were talking about New Hampshire, and I kind of think that New Hampshire is better than Wyoming, to be honest, in a lot of ways. Especially if you're concerned about having port access. New Hampshire has port access. Wyoming doesn't. New Hampshire is rural, but it's also close to big cities like Boston. Wyoming is just kind of out in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, that's my goal. And I'm trying to, one of the ways I'm trying to do that is to try to get more Bitcoiners to come up to PorcFest and talk to some of these people who either, they may be gold bugs, people like Tom Woods, who may not, understand the real benefits of Bitcoin, or people who are, people like Chris Pacey, who's a Bitcoin Cash developer, and try to counteract, the things that he's saying about Bitcoin, the negative things he's saying about Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it when you were talking about the hostility towards Bitcoin, it sounds like a lot of that is, kind of the remnants of the block size wars of people that were probably big blockers for the reasons that you stated, of wanting to have lower fees on, be able to do smaller transactions like that. And I encounter those people occasionally as well. It's interesting. But yeah, I mean, you guys represented Bitcoin well. You, Surfer Jim, Tone Vase, some other people. It had some pretty hard hitters there that did a great job of, I think, counteracting that. And There's Guy Swan and Alex Fetsky did a great podcast recently on Twitter Spaces, talking with Angela McCardle, and I think Robbie the Fire Bernstein was.
He was there too.
Yeah, he was in. He was in.
Okay.
He didn't talk, but yeah, kind of going.
He was in the audience. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, because I believe Angela and Robbie were both at Pork Fest this year and the year before, or not. No, sorry, not the year before, but this year they were.
Yeah, and I think Angela made a comment. It was either Dave Smith or Angela that made a comment about how annoying Bitcoin maximalists are.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, look, Angela is a vegan. She'll run into some issues with these hardcore Bitcoin maximalists who are posting pictures of steak all day. If you're a vegan and you're scrolling through Twitter and you see pictures of steak and burgers and bacon and ribs over and over again, you might find that annoying. So if she said that, I guess I can kind of understand it.
Yeah.
But to the point of again, I feel like if you listen to that debate, with Surfer Jim and Tone and Chris Pacia and Jeremy Kauffman. By the way, I'm a huge fan of Jeremy Kauffman. As much as I disagree with him on Library, as much as I disagree with him on altcoins, Jeremy Kauffman is a huge benefit to the Free State Project. The fact that he's here, the work that he's doing is incredible. He has basically almost single-handedly kind of taken over the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. I don't know all the details. I told you when you reached out to me on Twitter, I kind of told you I'm not kind of in the loop on all the Libertarian Party politics. But from what I've been told and from what I've seen, Jeremy Kauffman has done some great work, and this is not even including all the legislative wins that for liberty that we've had in the Free State Project. But the point I was getting at is you can see in that debate, if you watch it, I believe it's up on Tone's channel. You can see in that debate that these libertarians and some of these OG Bitcoiners, they should know better. They should understand Bitcoin. They should understand, if you've been in Bitcoin longer than me, if you've been in Bitcoin since 2011, 2012, you should know better than me that Bitcoin is not a company. And there's this urge whenever something new comes along to try to put it in a box of something that we know previously. Bitcoin. What is Bitcoin? We don't know what it is. It's a brand new thing. You know what it is? It's PayPal. That's what Bitcoin is. No, it's not PayPal. It's gold. That's what Bitcoin is. It's like gold. It's like PayPal. It's, so people try to push it into a box to try to kind of fit within a paradigm that they can already imagine in their heads. They can't kind of accept that it's this new thing. It's not PayPal. It's not a company. It's not a technology. It's not strictly a protocol. It's kind of a little bit of everything, and it's its own thing. And still, people look at Bitcoin as a company. I mean, you heard it in the debate. A lot of the people who liked altcoins, they were like, well, don't you guys want free market competition? You guys are monopolists. You only want one company. And it's like, to try to explain to someone who should know, a libertarian should understand the difference between a monopoly and a standard. So in fact, I think it was, ironically enough, I think it may have been Jeremy Kauffman who kind of pointed this out to me. Jeremy Kauffman, who's the guy from Library Token. Jeremy Kauffman was like, yeah, listen, if you have a company that is making nuts and you have a different company that's making bolts, they're both going to be on the same standard. You don't want to go into the hardware store and buy nuts and bolts that don't fit each other. It doesn't matter that they don't have to be made by the same company. So this is not a monopoly. This is a standard that many different companies follow. So that's the same thing with Bitcoin. There's lots of different companies that are involved in Bitcoin, but they all kind of follow the same standard. They follow the same protocol. If they're running a node, they enforce the consensus rules. So this is the kind of, I think, the main point that if people like Michael Malice and Dave Smith, if they can understand this one thing, that we're not talking about Bitcoin as a company. If you can understand that it's not a company, it's just a protocol, just like the internet, I think that will go a long way. And I feel like this point hasn't been stressed enough. It hasn't been hit enough. I think we make a lot of arguments like money wants to be one thing, which is true. Because if you talk to these guys that say we should have competing currencies, and you say, well, what's what is money? They'll say the money is the most saleable a good or commodity. That's what they'll say. And I'll say, what did you say? Most? most implies that there's going to be one. And when you kind of catch them on that, they're like, oh yeah, but I mean, you need one money to pay and one money to save. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. You want money to be universally used for everything. That's the ideal money anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think the idea of competing currencies is entirely wrong. It's just suggesting that these altcoins have any sort of competition with Bitcoin, I think, is misguided. Because when we look down the list of all of them, the majority of them are rather silly, or actually all of them are rather silly. I can't think of any that are, really legitimate. So when we look at competition, I think we're watching the competition of fiat currencies and Bitcoin right now. And
right, it's very important to understand what you're competing on. You're competing on the standard. So when you say competing currencies, sure, let's have competing currencies if you want to bring up your altcoin and put it up against Bitcoin. But just understand that there is going to be one winner. It's going to be Bitcoin, or if it's not Bitcoin, it's probably not going to be your altcoin. It'll probably be something else that we can't conceive of right now. It's not going to. Here's the thing. It's like, I think it's okay to say that at some point Bitcoin will be replaced by something better. At some point in the future, it will be. But it's not going to look like anything that's out today. It's not going to look like Bitcoin. It's going to use technology that we can't conceive of right now. It's going to use, and when I say that, people say quantum computers. I'm like, no, because we already kind of can think of quantum computers. It's going to be something that nobody expected, kind of like going from gold to Bitcoin. If you were a gold bug 200 years ago, you could never have conceived of Bitcoin coming along. So I think it's possible that at some point in the future, probably in the far future, probably hundreds of years in the future, there will be something that comes along that is better than Bitcoin, that might replace the Bitcoin standard. But it's not going to be one of these scammy, companies. That's basically the best word to put them. They're companies. They're not really decentralized protocols. They have a guy in charge. I think during the debate, Surfer Jim brought up that Jeremy had been sued for something having to do with library, and it's like, yeah, you can't sue Bitcoin. It's like, so the idea is that yes, there is competition among the standard, but once the standard is chosen, that's the standard. So you're talking about VHS and Betamax. Once VHS won, that's it. Betamax went away. I mean, my sister made the unfortunate mistake of buying an HD DVD when they first came out. She thought that was going to be the standard, but no, Blu-ray got more popular for whatever reason. No one really knows for sure why, but Blu-ray kind of won that war. So she had this HD DVD player. She had very few movies she could buy for it because people stopped making, HD DVD movies. Like I think when when Dark Knight Rises came out, I don't think they even made an HD DVD version of it. So she wanted that movie, but she was out of luck. So that's what it is. It's a format war, and it's not Coke and Pepsi. It's VHS or Betamax. If you remember that reference, Alex, that may be before your time.
it is, yeah. I do understand the reference because it's referenced so much, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
you used to go into video stores back when those were a thing. Not even Blockbusters, like these small corner shop video stores that never had the right selection. And they would have a Betamax section. So you would see like a really cool movie that you wanted to rent. And it's like, oh, I can't believe they have it in stock. And you go grab it and they're like, oh, it's Betamax, crap. They had to put it back because everyone had VHS. No one had Betamax. That's why the movie was available in the beta section.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're not really a fan of CBDCs. And I think, when I look at CBDCs, that's what I think Bitcoin is competing against and what we're trying to prevent at all costs. Could you outline a little bit about what CBDCs are and what they might look like in the future?
Sure. And I think it's a good tactic to bring up CBDCs when people say, you should have an open mind, you should have free currency competition I'm like, okay, so it's okay if I use a CBDC. A lot of these are anarchists. They hate CBDCs just like as much as you and I do. But when you bring up, okay, then why can't I just use a CBDC? Then, they may kind of understand why you're not interested in their centralized, altcoin. But so a CBDC just kind of, there have been lots of theories about it. But I feel like it's possible that the CBDCs could be used as a way to do some sort of a UBI or a STIMI where where you're directly getting your stimulus or whatever onto an app, a government app on your phone, something like that, so that you don't have to go through a banking system. You don't have to wait for a direct deposit or something like that. The government could just press a couple of buttons and just immediately, dump, stimulus money right into your government app on your phone. And that way they could also kind of monitor you, and they could restrict where you could use it. Like if you try to use it to buy Bitcoin, they won't let you. You can only use it in certain stores or something like that. So if you want to buy Bitcoin with your stimmies, they will, you'll have to jump through a bunch of hoops. Like you have to go buy a gift card and then sell the gift card. And then, so you have to do something weird to try to buy Bitcoin with it, or to try to invest it into the stock market, buy some of these meme stocks on Robinhood, whatever it is you want to do with it. So I just feel like it kind of misses the point of Bitcoin the same way the altcoins do. The same criticism that I'm going to make on CBDCs is the same criticism that I'm going to make on almost every altcoin. Is that it's a centralized system. It may LARP some Bitcoin technology. They'll say they'll have the word crypto in there somewhere, but it's not really, it's not really a blockchain. It's going to be a centralized database that controls how much each person has. And that kind of misses the whole point of Bitcoin. It's like, a horseless carriage. And then saying, well, wouldn't it be cool if I'm going to get a horseless carriage, but I'm going to get a horse with it too, so I can have like a backup system or something like that. That's kind of what it is. It's like putting a horse in front of a horseless carriage. That's kind of what CBDCs are. But again, 90% of the criticisms of CBDCs you can make on these altcoins. They're centralized. They're not really, distributed networks. No one's running a node. You only have, I don't know, half a dozen people running an Ethereum node, if that. No one knows for sure how many people are running an Ethereum node. There may not even be half a dozen. There may be less than that. So yeah, it's and another thing to consider is that a lot of times people think of, I've heard this argument. I think it may have been Arthur Hayes that made it. I'm not really sure. I may have read a blog from Arthur Hayes, but I read it somewhere where they said that Bitcoin is not a threat to the banking system. As much as we say, F the banks here, but it's not really going to make banks go away. It's a threat to central banking, but it's not a threat to, say, ordinary deposit banking or whatever, commercial banking. And the opposite is true of CBDCs. CBDCs would be a threat to banks. They would help the central bank, but they would be a huge threat to the banks. If the government can cut out the middleman, if the government can stimulate the economy without going through the banks. Currently, the Federal Reserve, when it quote unquote prints money, what it's doing is it's buying bonds on the open market operations, and basically that money is going into the banks. That's how it's quote unquote printing money. But if the government can print money without going through the banking system, if they can send it directly to the consumer, if the consumer doesn't have to have a bank account to go shop at Walmart or Target, if they can just use that app that has the government crypto on it, then that might be a big threat to the banks. So it's funny, the banks might actually be the ones fighting against CBDCs. So, but we'll see. Some people saying that's hogwash, that the banks will be on board, but who knows? It's kind of an interesting little wrinkle to look at. How it may be that Bitcoin saves the banks. There was one other point that I wanted to make. I've heard a lot of libertarians bring up free banking. Every time I try to say that there's only going to be one currency, they always bring up the free banking system. I think Jeremy Kauffman actually brought up free banking during the debate. Here's the thing. I think free banking is great. My understanding of free banking is, maybe I have an incorrect, but my understanding is that the banks minted their own or printed their own notes. Each bank, I think this was in the 19th century in America, and I think maybe England had the same thing. Each bank printed their own currency, and the currency was, you could use it everywhere because they would trust the bank that it came from. So each bank had their own currency. So they say, oh, then why can't we have that? We'll have each company printing their own crypto. I'm like, you don't understand. It's not the same thing. The banks may have printed their own notes, but they are all following the same standard. They were following the gold standard. So if you think free banking is coming in the future, it's going to be on a similar standard. It's going to be we have Bitcoin in our bank and we're issuing, 10 Satoshi notes or whatever that you can go out and use and spend easily. So you don't have to worry about transaction fees. So that's what it's going to be. If we do go back to a free banking standard, which we may, and I think that would actually be a cool thing, is they're all the banks are going to be on one standard. Each bank, if some bank comes up and prints their own token out of nowhere, and that's not going to be accepted anywhere. I'd rather use the bank's notes that is backed by Bitcoin rather than some weird crypto no one's ever heard of. So free banking is not an objection to a Bitcoin standard, to Bitcoin being the universal money. It's actually, you're missing the point if you think free banking means that each bank printed their own, token and out of nothing. That's not what happened.
Yeah, a lot to talk about that. So, like on the topic of CBDCs in the U.S., I think they're somewhat unlikely in the same way that we're watching China go through with their own CBDC for the reasons that you stated. I don't think Wells Fargo and J.P. Morgan are going to be very happy with that. So it'll be really interesting to see what they roll out here. And yeah, on the topic of free banking, I just struggle to see in the world today having all of these localized currencies in the way that many people suggest, because it's so inconvenient. Like if I'm only able to spend a currency in one region and I have to switch in and out of that currency to go, a state over or a town over, or even into another country, buy things internationally, it's really, really inconvenient. I think localized currencies too are, pretty easy to co-opt. So there might be a future for it. But I struggle to see that as like a real solid solution.
That's a very good objection because, during the free banking era, travel wasn't really, you stayed kind of in your local region. So if everybody in the town knew the local bank and they trusted the local bank because it was the big bank in town, you could use those funds within that town. But, with railroads and everything and, then eventually air travel where you can kind of move around, maybe free banking was kind of less appropriate then just because, hey, I don't know this bank in, from Ames, Iowa, never heard of them, so that's actually a pretty good point. I have made that point too. But again, I think that it's possible that we can go to that if all the banks are on the same standard, if they're on a similar standard, then I think it will be fine. As you would kind of just like the same way you would accept a check, from a bank. Maybe even if you've never heard of the bank, you might accept a check from it, and maybe do the same thing with notes. But yeah, that's a very good objection. I've actually thought about that, Alex, as well.
Yeah, I was at a conference recently. It wasn't Bitcoin related, but one of the speakers had that suggestion, and I just, the only thing I could think of was the Africa and I think they're called the agra beads or something like that. And we've just watched over and over as local populations have been manipulated and destroyed by, bigger forces coming in and totally messing with the currency. And so I think if that experiment happens, it's not going to work well.
So yeah, that's a very important point. And I still, to this day, I refer people to Robert Breedlove's great article, Masters and Slaves of Money. Robert Breedlove, for all the controversy he's had lately, he's blocked me, by the way, on Twitter. So he blocked me on Twitter. I don't even think I said anything bad to him. I kind of, at least nothing worse than what everybody else was saying. But just because Robert Breedlove did something that we find objectionable doesn't mean that his words especially from before, are not valid. I would still refer people to Robert Breedlove's article. And Masters and Slaves of Money is a very good point, because when you hear people saying, look, what do you care if I want to use this token, if I want to use that token, it's it's up to me. It's it's free market, bro. Whatever I want to do. If I find value in Dash, let me use Dash. I'm like, you're right. I honestly, I don't care. But I would be remiss if I didn't at least point out that you're going to get screwed. Because money is going to go towards money wants to be one thing. And if you end up using the money that is unsound, you're going to end up working for the people who are using the sound money. That's what's going to happen. Is you're going to be, you're going to be, serving the people who are using the good money. That's what ended up happening in Africa. They called those beads, those glass beads, they eventually called them slave beads, because they could make them so cheaply in Europe. They were expensive to make and scarce in Africa, but in Europe, they figured out we could make these pretty easily, and they could come in. And because of the Cantillon effect, we hear that over and over again, how unfair it is. When you could print money, the people who are close to the money printer are actually less affected by the money printing than the people on the bottom of the food chain. So the people who got the glass beads first, they benefited from the extra money. But then as they kind of went through the economy, these people ended up being enslaved by the people who had the harder money, the gold. You don't want to end up with the bad money. You don't want to be holding Bitcoin Cash or Dash when the music stops. You want to have the hardest money ever conceived.
Yeah, super interesting. This might be kind of like a dumb segue, but would that potentially be possible with Bitcoin? So like we look at El Salvador right now, where money means like the dollar or a few dollars means something different than a few dollars in the United States, because there's just such a large stratification of wealth between here and there. If Bitcoiners go to El Salvador with large amounts of Bitcoin and start spending in the economy and spread it out, could it be a similar effect, or would it be because it is like a global traded currency that it won't cause some sort of inflation, in the prices of goods and services there?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think that the reason why Bukele, one of the reasons why Bukele made Bitcoin legal tender was because he wanted tourism from Bitcoiners. He's like, there are these guys, they're Bitcoiners, they live in America or Europe, and they have money. They like to go on vacations. They like to go to Mexico. Why don't they come to El Salvador instead? So I think that his idea was it'll attract more Bitcoiners to come visit El Salvador and kind of help the economy. I don't really see it as the same thing. I mean, it's one thing if the locals in El Salvador, if they don't really like that Bitcoin is legal tender, and they convert the sats to dollars, maybe you can make that argument. But I think that if enough Bitcoiners go down there, and if we go to enough places and we spend enough sats, the cool thing about the law is because these guys can now spend their sats in a lot of places, because the government's making it legal tender, is they don't have to convert it to back to fiat. They can just keep the sats, which is kind of the benefit. And also, a friend of mine, Peter St. Ange, who was at PorcFest. He was one of the speakers at PorcFest, and he was one of the guys that was hanging out with us at the Bitcoin Lounge. He was making the point that remittances are actually as big an industry percentage-wise in El Salvador as oil is in Saudi Arabia, which is mind-blowing. That something like 20 or whatever it is, 20 or 30% of their economy goes to fees for remittances. So if they're using Strike, or if they're using maybe not Strike, but let's say Strike, or if they're using some service that sends lightning payments for remittances at a fraction of the cost, and the people in El Salvador who are receiving that lightning, if they don't have to convert it to fiat to spend, if they can actually spend it as sats, that's a benefit to them. That's one of the reasons why they made it legal tender, is so that these guys, what's the point? If you send the transaction, if you send the remittance and it's super cheap, but then there's a huge conversion cost to convert it back to fiat before they can spend it, then you didn't really save that much money. Okay, so you got hit. You didn't get hit on the transfer, but you got hit when you changed it back to fiat. So in order to help that's one of the reasons why they had the legal tender, is these guys can actually not have to convert back to fiat and save on conversion costs. So that's kind of it. So if you look at it that way, it kind of makes sense what El Salvador did. We have a lot of purist libertarians, even people who should know better, people like Ben Prentice, but they're falling for this FUD from people like George Selgin and Steve Hanke. These guys are not friends of Bitcoin. Steve Hanke definitely is not a friend of Bitcoin. And George Selgin, he may say he likes Bitcoin, but all his rhetoric is anti-Bitcoin. So just because someone says, no, I like Bitcoin, but it sucks for this, these 3 or 4 reasons. That's what George Selgin is doing. So, and I think a lot of Bitcoiners are kind of falling prey to this, libertarian purist rhetoric of, well, we don't like legal tender laws. Ron Paul said it in Bitcoin Miami. At least I was told. I didn't hear him say it, but from what I heard, Ron Paul said that legal tender laws are bad, or we should get rid of legal tender. Sure, let's get rid of legal tender laws. Let's start in the U.S. Let's not start in El Salvador. If we're going to get rid of legal tender laws, yeah, I'm on board. I'm not gonna start in El Salvador. So yeah, and I maybe in the last 8 years that I've been in Bitcoin and libertarianism, I've maybe heard about legal tender 3 times. So suddenly now it's a big topic, whereas before nobody really cared one way or the other. But now that Bitcoin's accepted, oh no, now we got to look at legal tender laws. Now it's a problem. But I think it's going to be a huge benefit to the El Salvadoran people. I don't see it as being something that some of them may be nervous and apprehensive about it, but the way we solve that is not by, criticizing the law, but by going there and actually going to see the vendors and talking to them and seeing what we could do to help them. If they're nervous about Bitcoin and they need help, they need education, or they need whatever, hardware wallets, although that's kind of a controversial topic in and of itself. We can try to help them and figure this stuff out, help them with infrastructure. Do what people do. They go over there and they go and they see the vendors and they go to Bitcoin Beach, or they go to wherever the place is. I think it begins with a Z. I don't know how to pronounce it. Don't do what Brock did. Don't go for a day, have a photo op with some politicians, and then not even go out and meet the people. That was just embarrassing. I think Brock should be embarrassed to show his face at any Bitcoin event, but then I think he's not. I think he's incapable of being humiliated at this point.
Yeah, I was gonna bring up Brock too. That was go down for an Instagram picture and leave.
Yeah.
The legal tender law are funny. I actually asked Jo Jorgensen. I went to one of her campaign rallies and asked her about inflation, and how we end the Fed, and that was one of the things she suggested was repealing legal tender laws. And she says you should be able to use whatever type of money you want to, even if it's chickens. And I just shook my head of like how weak and silly that argument was, because I thought I gave her a softball, but I didn't really know what her platform was, or about her politics. I was just curious, because I had these like assumptions of what the Libertarian Party was, and I didn't realize that it was as messy as you kind of alluded to earlier. But yeah, I am totally with you. I think like as libertarian minded people, we've seen how dangerous it is to go into other countries and meddle in their politics, and to sit on our little high horse in the US and look down at whether it was Bush saying we can't send over contraception to Africa, and then everybody got AIDS as a result of it, or just silly things like that. But I like how you outline with some context, the perspective of where the president is coming from. And I think this is such a huge step for a country like that, because they've been living under the dollar's tyranny. And I'm a huge fan of Steve Hanke. He provides me a lot of amusement with his awful takes. Because one of the things he was suggesting, with Venezuela is that they go on a dollar standard. That's his solution. Which is just absolutely bonkers to me, when we've seen how destructive that is for countries like, and when you look at how destructive that's been for El Salvador, specifically with essentially being entirely reliant on Western Union and what these people have to go through to get money. It's just, it's infuriating to me. So I'm totally with you.
I'm not necessarily against foreign countries going on a dollar standard. Honestly, the people of Venezuela would benefit if they were on a dollar standard compared to they're basically, I think the dollar might be like, if not the second, like the third or fourth most used currency in Venezuela. Bitcoin is in there too. I think I think the guy's name was Larry White. He was debating John Vallis at PorcFest. He said that Bitcoin is the 5th most used currency in Venezuela, after like the dollar, the euro, the bolivar, and a few others, and after the Colombian currency or whatever. And it's like, okay, if Bitcoin is the 5th most used currency in Venezuela, I don't see that's not an argument against Bitcoin. That's actually, so he was using it as saying that that it was an argument against Bitcoin. But I don't necessarily think that it's bad for countries to dollarize. So and the reason why El Salvador went off of their own national currency and just started using the US dollar as their national currency, I believe, is just so that they could just offload their monetary policy. So they just didn't have to think about it anymore. They didn't have to worry about, if they're printing too much, printing too little. They just, everyone just used the dollar. So it was kind of easier for them to govern. So I don't necessarily think that Henke is wrong on that, but he is a bit of a hypocrite, isn't he? Because he says that they should go on a dollar standard, but he doesn't want them to go on a Bitcoin standard. What's the difference? I mean, Bitcoin is like the dollar, except it's a little harder. We like to criticize the dollar here, in the Bitcoin and libertarian community, but the dollar is still better than 99% of other national currencies out there. The dollar is better than the Mexican peso, for example. I'd rather have US dollar. If I was going to be paid in a national currency, not Bitcoin, it would probably be US dollars. So it is better for some of these, like places like Argentina. They kind of destroy their national currency every 20 to 30 years. And I think places like El Salvador, they were tired of doing that. They were tired of kind of destroying their own native national currency every few decades and starting over. Eventually they're like, you know what, we're just going to use dollars. Yeah, and I think it's not that surprising that a dollarized country was the first to make Bitcoin their a legal tender. And I think other South American countries and Central American countries might follow suit. I've been hearing things about Paraguay, so that might be interesting to see what happens there, because I believe Paraguay also is a dollarized country, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess when I say that, I mean it in the context of what it brings to the country with all the meddling politics and the IMF, and but you take a really practical approach, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. The IMF, they weren't too happy about El Salvador making Bitcoin their legal one of their legal tenders, and it's funny because they said it was for environmental reasons, which is just patently absurd. I mean, first of all, the IMF, when were they concerned about the environment? When they become an environmental agency? Suddenly now they're an environmental expert now when they're talking about Bitcoin, and it's like the thing about a lot of libertarians and Bitcoiners, a lot of us are pessimists. Bitcoiners, we all have hope, but we're pessimists. We always assume that the government's going to do something bad. They're going to do something wrong. We never even stop to consider that governments may actually want Bitcoin. They may actually welcome Bitcoiners. We want Bitcoiners to come here. We want to go on a Bitcoin standard. We never actually stop to consider that. We always thought that, what's the government going to do to shut us down? The government will never allow Bitcoin used as money. I heard this argument maybe a week before the announcement. The government will never allow Bitcoin to be used as money. And all of a sudden, the government mandated that not just barred, no, not just we're okay with it. They mandated that you must accept Bitcoin as long as you have the facilities to do so. I think it was just comical. I mean, we were having arguments a week before Miami with people saying that the government's not going to let Bitcoin be used as money, and it's just so comical that no one saw this coming. Even the most even the smartest economists, the most optimistic Bitcoiners didn't see this coming.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I find really interesting right now is I think a lot of people had expectations that the price would be a lot higher and that the adoption that we're seeing wouldn't be as drastic as what's happening right now. I think MicroStrategy was a huge surprise to people, and El Salvador is definitely a huge surprise. I mean, the thing that blows my mind about El Salvador is I had Mike Peterson on my podcast 2 or 3 months before that announcement came out. and there was no discussion. I asked him specifically about the local government and their viewpoint on it, and he said that he was trying to meet with the president or some higher uh, government officials to discuss Bitcoin, and it wasn't really on their radar. It's just amazing how quickly that happened. Blows my mind.
Yeah, that is. So I'm not too familiar with the name you just mentioned. Is that one of the guys from Bitcoin Beach? Is
Yeah,
that
he started Bitcoin Beach. Yeah.
okay? That makes sense. I figured it must have been him, but I just hadn't heard the name before. But yeah, that is pretty interesting. But again, maybe he planted the seed. If enough, when you hear, like for me, I heard about Bitcoin in 2011, and I kind of dismissed it and thought it was a stupid scam. And then when I heard about it the second time, I was a little bit more open to it in 2013. It was funny because I thought I was hearing it for the first time, but it was actually the second time I had heard about it.
Yeah.
Same thing with Michael Saylor. We talk to people. There's maybe half a dozen people who claim that they orange pilled. I'm the one who orange pilled Michael Saylor. I'm the one who told Michael Saylor about Bitcoin because they talked to Michael Saylor about Bitcoin at some point in the past. But then at some point he did get orange pilled. But who knows who it was? Maybe was it one of the guys that says that they're the ones who orange pilled it, or did he just figure it out on his own because he saw what was happening because of all the money printing and after COVID, and that's what he says. If you ask him, he says that he kind of got into Bitcoin, I believe, after all the money printing. That's kind of when he kind of saw the argument in favor of Bitcoin, whereas before he didn't really see it.
Yeah, it's really interesting to get into, some of his discussion of why Bitcoin clicked for him with all the money that he lost in Argentina with the currency devaluations and the capital controls that they placed. I mean, he had a story where he was talking about wanting to buy a yacht and sail it to Miami as a way to get his money out of the country.
Oh yeah, I remember hearing this story. I don't remember where it was in one of his 3 million podcasts, but I do remember hearing the story where he was trying to get the funds out and he just couldn't. He couldn't do it. It was, yeah. I at first I was like, well, I don't remember him talking about this, but then when you talked about the yacht, now it's coming back to me. He did mention that. Yeah. Yeah. It's like you have to jump through all these hoops just to use your money, and we're okay with it. We're thinking, well, yeah, because it's government property. I remember, back before the days of Bitcoin, I was just a regular. I wasn't even libertarian. I was just a regular conservative, and I would argue with the leftists at work, my coworkers, about how, hey, when you make money, it's your money. So why should the government take however many percent of it? And then these leftists would argue back, no, the government is who makes the money. They're the ones who print the money. So it's government property. They just let you keep some of it, and that's kind of this mindset we have, is we just think of money as this government good. We don't think of it as, no, this is mine. If I work for someone and they pay me $500 a week, I should be able to take home $500 a week. I shouldn't have to look and say, well, how much am I actually keeping? $387. Okay, I guess that's all right. I guess that's fair. We're beaten to accept this as being fair. That the fact that your productivity is being stolen by people who are using it. They say they're using it for good, but they're using it for a lot of nefarious things too.
Yeah, and we don't have a choice of how they use it, I think ultimately is what's really important. I mean, that's something, people talk about how Bitcoin really brings back property rights. I think that's a really important discussion to have. And a lot of people don't think about how they don't really have property, I see buying a house today as essentially leasing it, land from the government, because we have to pay uh, taxes, property taxes, and then go through all of these zoning laws to get permission to build a shed that's bigger than however big it is, and to do all of these silly things. And Bitcoin is one of those places that you can actually own something, and I think that's huge.
Right. Ostensibly, a lot of those regulations that, as property owners, as libertarians, we may not like, they're actually done to protect previous property owners. So you hear a leftist complain about saying inequality, how housing is unaffordable in certain big cities like San Francisco or Boston or someplace like that. But then they won't acknowledge the fact that there's all this red tape. If you want to build, you know, an apartment complex, it's almost impossible to do so. You have to jump through so many hoops, or you have to you have to grease the right palms. You have to pay off the right politicians before they'll okay it. And so, you know, when we say, you know, we have all these regulations on what you can build on your own property and stuff like that, it's actually, a lot of that isn't really, it's done to protect other property owners. They don't want you to build more property because it's going to devalue their property. You know, if there's fewer buildings, the existing buildings are actually worth more. So it's a very, very, very anti-working class, anti-poor strategy that the left is going down. This is why I think I'm not really a fan of the conservatives either, because they're also idiots. But the left, I think, is going to be losing this whole working class argument. I think they're more and more. I think it's interesting because I think in either the next presidential election or maybe the one after, it's just going to be clear at that point that the Republicans are going to be kind of catering to the poor, kind of these rural, you know, small town people, and the left is kind of going to be catering to, you know, rich people that live on the coasts. And I think that it's kind of it's been going in that direction for a while. And before it was about Democrats are for the poor, but now it's going to be about Republicans are a populist, because when you say populist, that kind of has a negative connotation, whereas saying you're for the poor, it has a positive connotation. So that's what the narrative is going to be. But yeah, I think I hate that I brought up politics. I hate that I kind of took us off topic. We can get back to Bitcoin if you want, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. I think I've been trying to embrace this idea of being post-political as much as possible. But I think it is interesting to, you know, be aware of what's happening in the politics to some degree, you know, and to see the silliness of it. It's like the same reason why I have recently been looking into shitcoins, so I can explain why it's wrong to, or why they're not legitimate to people, you know, that are interested in them, have an educated discussion about it. But yeah, I mean, this idea of poverty management that the left promotes, and you know, a lot of the right does too, is just so insane, because nobody has ever built any sort of serious wealth on a welfare check. You know, it's like, we're gonna make you poor, and keep you, or not necessarily make you poor, but keep you poor and manage it. And I think that's, you know, such an evil thing that Bitcoin really frees people from, because there's so many different, you know, ways to go about it. Like with what Fold's doing, you know, I have this discussion with a lot of, you know, no coiners that claim that they don't have money for Bitcoin. It's like, you buy things, just stack sats with Fold, you know, or whatever, you know, else. There's a bunch of services out there that you can do stuff like that. I think that's incredible for somebody to build some semblance of savings, because that's a major issue that we have in our country. Nobody has any money set aside in case something bad happens. It's all credit cards and, you know, craziness. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what we're going to be seeing is that Bitcoin lowers your time preference. So I think Bitcoiners kind of, it changes you. It does change you being a Bitcoiner. You kind of have more of a long-term mindset. You kind of think saving is cool now, where before you may have thought of saving as just being a chore. Now it's like, you know, when we stack sats, it's like, oh, I just bought 1 million, you know, sats, you know, and just take a screenshot of it and put it on Twitter. I do that. Yeah, I'm one of those idiots that does that. But I mean, it's just kind of cool to do to kind of make saving cool, because before you talk to people about saving, and they're like, well, yeah, I'm not gonna have any money in my bank account when I die. My bank account is gonna be empty when I die. I just want to make sure that I spend everything that I got. Now, Bitcoiners are kind of talking about intergenerational wealth and things like that. It's we're not thinking about at what price we're going to cash out. That's another thing that separates Bitcoiners from altcoiners. And I do like to say altcoiners, not shitcoiners, because I feel like when I say shitcoiners, a lot of shitcoiners are like, well, he's not talking about me because I'm not a shitcoiner. But if I say altcoiner, then a lot of, you know, altcoiners are like, what does he mean altcoiner? Does he think Cardano is an altcoin? Because someone might be into, some shit coin, but when I say shit coin, they're like, well, he's not talking about, XYZ shit coin. He's talking about, that other shit coin. So I like to say altcoiners. I think I heard Dieter kind of say the same thing on Twitter. But the point is that a lot of these altcoiners, they're kind of into following some leader. They want to hear what some billionaire or what some celebrity says. They're waiting for a next celebrity pump, or they're waiting for, Lindsay Lohan to endorse their altcoin, and some silly thing like that. And I feel like Bitcoin is the true anarchist money. I mean, look, Steve Wozniak came out a couple of days ago or yesterday or whenever, said something good about Bitcoin, but so what? We don't care. It's not like, it's like, cool. Yeah, we're happy Steve Wozniak said something positive about Bitcoin. But I think some Bitcoiners were like, well, have you fucking bought any? Don't just say something positive, go out and buy some. That's that. So we don't really care who you are. We don't care if you're Elon Musk. We don't care if you're the richest man in the world. We don't care if you're the biggest movie star. If you say something stupid about Bitcoin, we're going to tell you to have fun staying poor. And we just don't care. We don't care about offending people. And we're okay with calling people like Mark Cuban idiots, because they are idiots, and we're okay with just pointing out the obvious. Whereas I feel like a lot of altcoiners are like, oh, we're gonna, it's like, I think so-and-so is gonna come out in favor of, this one altcoin. And I think it's just hilarious. So if you want to be an anarchist, get the anarchist money. The anarchist money is not the money that's ruled by an anarchist. The anarchist money is the money that has no ruler. This just kind of brings it back to the libertarians. A lot of libertarians went the Bitcoin Cash route because they're like, well, I like Roger. I trust Roger. Roger's an anarchist. I'm an anarchist. I should follow what Roger says. I'm like, no, if you're following an anarchist, you're not an anarchist. Bitcoin is the only anarchist money because we have no leader and we don't care about leaders. And we'll tell, if tomorrow Michael Saylor says something stupid about Bitcoin, we'll tell him to have fun staying poor too. And he fully knows this. He kind of understands this. But Jack Dorsey, I'm a fan of Jack Dorsey. A lot of Bitcoiners don't like Jack Dorsey, but I like Jack Dorsey. But I think the way he's going about the NFT stuff, he's just wrong. He's just wrong on it. And sure, it's great to have somebody like him in the space that supports Bitcoin, but we also don't really care. Bitcoin will be fine either way. We're not worshiping any so-called leaders in Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that about Bitcoin. And you had a pretty skeptical take on Elon in 2019, so you were pretty ahead of the curve on that one. I think a lot of us fell for it and got overly excited about him. I definitely am learning better pretty quickly not to get excited about these people that are, and I saw the Steve Watson.
Yeah, absolutely. Elon Musk, I'll have to credit Thunderfoot, and Thunderfoot is he's no libertarian by any stretch of the imagination. And he's one of these crazy leftists who's like, oh, you should wear a mask, you idiot. And, don't be a COVID idiot. He's one of those idiots. But when it comes to Elon Musk, he actually called it pretty early on. He was making fun of Elon Musk as early as 2017, 2018, back when everybody was like looking at him as being the smartest man in the world. He was calling out on his bullshit long before. So I wish I could say that I was just really, really smart and figured out that Elon Musk was full of shit early on. But yeah, maybe I did fall into the Hyperloop, hype, so to speak. Maybe I did fall for that until I kind of saw Thunderfoot kind of point out how this doesn't make any sense scientifically to use a vacuum tube to transport people. And he pointed out all the dangers, and he pointed out the fact that this is not a new idea. This idea has been around for 100 years, and there's a reason why no one's used it for 100 years, because of all these faults. But then, I listened to libertarians saying, oh, isn't Elon Musk great? Because he's gonna come out with a better transportation system than the stupid high-speed rail that they're trying to build in California. And it's like, it's, as a libertarian, you want to be like, yeah, rah, free market, private business creates this stuff. But yeah, I just kind of felt when Jack Dorsey kind of first came out and was getting into Bitcoin, a lot of Bitcoiners got excited. They're like, oh, cool, Jack Dorsey's on board. He's a Bitcoiner. Good. Let's get the next big guy. What about Elon Musk? And I was just like, he's not your guy. I'm like, he's like, I predicted that Elon Musk would start his own shitcoin. That's what I predicted. I think back in 2019, I thought it was 2018, but then I went back and I looked at my old tweets and I was like, actually it was 2019. But yeah, I predicted, I'm like, and I mean, I was sort of wrong because he did adopt Bitcoin. Elon Musk did in his company, but that was because I didn't see Michael Saylor coming. I couldn't have predicted that Michael Saylor would have orange pilled him. And I think Michael Saylor did orange pill him to some extent. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to take credit for being, super smart on this, but I just kind of knew, and we don't need them. We don't need Elon. We don't need anybody. We don't even need Michael Saylor. Bitcoin is going to be just fine, even without a Michael Saylor. But I mean, it's good. It's good that people like Saylor and Jack Dorsey are around. Don't get me wrong, but again, we're not beholden to them, and we don't care to tell them off if they say something stupid.
Yeah, 100%. Jack Dorsey is definitely kind of an anomaly, and it's hard for me to. Well, I think it'd be unfair to say that I could really understand anybody and their motivations because people are so different, and I don't really know anything about him other than he's the CEO of Twitter and Square. But yeah, he definitely is interesting to me. Do you have any thoughts on the ESG movement?
Well, one thing to say about, before we get to ESG, one quick point about Jack Dorsey is when Jack Dorsey became a big time Bitcoiner, I thought that it was great. I thought this is the maturation of Bitcoin movement. Our future, Bitcoin evangelists they're not going to be Roger Ver. They're not going to be people who, are anarchists, who talk the talk, who say all the right things. They're going to be people who say the wrong things. Maybe they're bad on quote unquote censorship, although that's kind of a loaded topic. But they kind of get Bitcoin. So to me, I thought of it as maturation. You're not going to take over the world with a new currency if it's known as the libertarian currency. So to me, I was very, very happy to see, even though I may disagree with Jack Dorsey on a lot of stuff, I was very happy to see him on board, and it seemed like he got it. Regarding the ESG movement, I'm kind of on board with I'm not, I don't really listen to one of the well-known podcasts that I've just never really gotten into, and it's not anything against the people who do it, but I've never really gotten into Tales from the Crypt. I've never been a regular listener of that, but I've been really happy with what I think it was Matt Odell was saying about the ESG movement. I'm on board with him. I heard him on Twitter Spaces saying we should not. I'm hoping it was Matt Odell. I hope I'm not getting that wrong, but he was like, I 100% agree with him. We should not accept the premise of the ESGers. I mean, I believe he or somebody else used the word terrorist. That's right. We should call out their bullshit. We should fight it head on. We shouldn't try to kind of go the route of, oh, okay, well, Bitcoin uses renewable energy. We shouldn't do that. We should just point out that, Bitcoin doesn't use Bitcoin doesn't use as much energy as they're making out to. They feel, Bitcoin, we have to get out there and tackle the narrative head on. We shouldn't kind of be afraid of fighting these guys. Just like we're not afraid of some billionaire coming out and saying something bad about Bitcoin, we shouldn't be afraid of these ESGers. We should take them on head on and call them idiots, call them and point out that that the whole climate narrative is just completely wrong. And if you care about the environment, you should be supporting Bitcoin. If you actually care about the environment, none of these guys actually care about none of the ESG people care about the environment. But if you actually care about the environment, you should be out there promoting Bitcoin. If you actually care about inequality, you should be out there promoting Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. All these things that people claim they are in favor of, but they're really not. They don't care about. You need to be out there in favor of Bitcoin because Bitcoin has no leader. There's nobody in charge of the money printer, so it's the most fair distribution. So unlike the current system where the guys at the top get the money first, the cantillionaires get the money first, Bitcoin is actually fair. So if you care about inequality, you should be in favor of Bitcoin. If you care about the environment, and if you want to motivate people to kind of think more long-term, have a low time preference, and you want to motivate people to not go into debt, to not consume, and to actually save and conserve, be a conservationist, then you should be promoting Bitcoin. And if you're not, you're just a LARPer. You're someone who lives on Park Avenue in New York, and you take private jets everywhere, and you never go to the wilderness. But then you claim that you care about the wilderness, even though you never go there. You stay in your the so-called Park Avenue environmentalists. I don't know if you've heard that phrase before, but yeah, we should not be afraid of these people. We should call them out for their hypocrisy, and yeah, ridicule is not a bad word. We need to ridicule them because their narrative is patently absurd. The fact that a Tesla is better for the environment, the fact that a wind farm is better for the environment, we need to call that shit out. Wind farms take up so much land to produce the same amount of energy. Solar farms take up so much land to produce a tiny amount of energy. And pollution, don't get me wrong, I hate pollution. Pollution is bad. But pollution is not the worst thing for the environment. There's actually one thing that is worse for the environment than pollution. Can you guess what it is, Alex? It's okay if you don't know, but because a lot of people don't know.
Probably mining, tearing up the earth.
Yeah, that's a good one, actually. That's kind of where I was going. What's worse for the environment than even pollution is habitat destruction. Mm-hmm. Habitat destruction is a bigger threat to the environment than pollution. I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying pollution is good. Pollution is bad too, and we should try to limit pollution. Absolutely, pollution does harm the environment, but habitat destruction is a bigger threat to the environment than pollution is. You can clean up pollution. If you destroy a habitat, it's gone. You can't rebuild it. So if you're going to take desert landscape, which a lot of animals and plants live in, and you're going to destroy it to put up a stupid wind farm that breaks down, that gets dust on the actual reflectors, and you can't even get the power that you think you were going to get, and you wasted all this precious desert landscape land, and you made your stupid solar farm where now it doesn't even work. And if it does, when it does work, it's intermittent at best, and it doesn't actually give you consistent energy. And you're saying you're doing this for the environment? You know what? That angers me. It very much angers me because I actually care about the environment and I don't want habitats destroyed. You know what? Let's build more nuclear plants. The footprint of a nuclear plant is much smaller. Let's build more nuclear plants. We'll reduce emissions. We'll reduce carbon. If you think carbon's a problem, we'll get rid of the carbon output. I like the fact that I live here in New Hampshire and there's a nuclear power plant not too far from me. I think maybe 30, 40 miles away from me. So I get cheaper electricity, consistent, cheap electricity, and it's emission free. There's no carbon, there's no pollution, and it's on a small footprint. It's on a small piece of land. You can go drive by it and see it. It's kind of a cool little. In fact, I'm thinking about moving closer to it just so I could get irradiated, maybe get some superpowers or something from the nuclear plant.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's some interesting, I've talked about nuclear a couple times on the podcast. There's some pretty interesting developments that would make it a lot more efficient and smaller scale potentially and safer. And I think a lot of people refer back to, in their heads, nuclear like 50, 60 years ago. When they're thinking about it today, that there's not been any improvements. But yeah, that idea of environmental destruction, like you were talking about, is definitely a huge one. It's one that I've, been thinking about a lot in Arizona, specifically with how our cities are impacting the environment and rainfall and, all the pesticides and stuff like that we're using. I think what it comes down to at the end of the day is these people want to control and manipulate. It's the fallacy that central planning, is good in any way, shape, or form. It's inherently bad and destructive, and that when it's applied to anything. And yeah, this ESG movement is, kind of funny. I'm going to be doing a deep dive on it on my other show, Toxic Airwaves. And, one of the first groups to suggest ESG was BlackRock. And I think that's just, yeah, in like 2004, the people that are buying up all the houses so that we can't buy houses. Like,
yeah,
these aren't good.
A lot of social justice there with BlackRock. Yeah, BlackRock running a charity, don't you know?
Yeah, it's about control. That's what it is at the end of the day. People don't want you to be free. They don't want you to, be able to live unencumbered. And yeah, for whatever reason, I don't know. It's sick. It's the ESG movement is, just supporting and parroting the ideas of people that want population control.
So
Yeah.
I actually, I think it was maybe a year and a half ago or something like that. Peter McCormack had on his not what Bitcoin did, but his other podcast, his non-Bitcoin podcast, a guy who's huge into climate change. And this guy talked, and Peter talked for about an hour and 20 minutes, whatever it was, hour and a half, about climate change, how it's real, how it's, and how these evil Republicans are trying to shut it down and this and that. And, and I listened, it was torturous. It was a torturous podcast to get through, but I listened to the entire thing. And the reason why I listened to the entire thing is I was waiting to hear one word: nuclear. I was waiting to hear the word nuclear somewhere in this podcast, and it never came up. He never brought it up. Peter never brought it up. And Peter was like saying, hopefully some of these, Bitcoiners will listen to this and kind of realize that climate change is real and we need to do this. So I actually talked to Peter in person about a week after I listened to that podcast. And I told him I listened to it, and he asked me, did it trigger you? I'm like, yes, it did actually. But I was waiting to hear about nuclear. And nuclear, if you're gonna take climate change seriously, nuclear has to be a solution. And he's like, oh yeah, sure. So Peter, apparently he's fine with nuclear, but I'm just wondering, because I don't think a lot of these guys that will scream about climate change actually look at nuclear as a solution. That's how you know they're LARPers. Again, to bring up Thunderfoot again, crazy leftist, and he thinks climate change is a big threat to the world. But if you listen to him, he's actually a fan of nuclear energy. And he actually points out on his channel how nuclear energy is safe. And it's not, don't listen to all these, people screaming about Fukushima and Chernobyl, and how he points out the facts about how safe it is, and how, your fish, if you catch fish from the Pacific Ocean, it's not irradiated. That's all bullshit. He points out all this stuff. So to Thunderfoot's credit, he's one of those leftists that I respect, because he actually looks at nuclear as a solution to climate change. He's a scientist, he's a chemist, so he understands this stuff better than a lot of people.
I'll have to go follow him. Yeah, it's such a taboo subject, and hopefully that will change in the future. I think we're going to see, I know India is really pushing for nuclear power, and if they're successful, I think we're going to see that impact the rest of the world as well. And hopefully, yeah, I'm feeling pretty pessimistic about the U.S. Currently. What's giving you hope for the future and getting you excited?
I think that things are always, and I know that what I'm going to say is very controversial, and a lot of people are going to, not like that I'm saying this, but I really think that things are getting better, and things are usually getting better, but they always appear to be getting worse. And that's the same for even liberty. I feel like we are getting more freer, and we are getting, things are getting better. But the problem is that when things get better, you tend to notice the bad things more. Mm-hmm. As for example, just as a quick example, poverty was dropping a lot in America in the 1950s. The poverty rates were dropping like crazy. But in the 1960s, we got Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society programs. Why did we have the Great Society programs in the 60s? Because poverty was dropping so quickly, it became more noticeable. When you did have poverty, it was more noticeable because it wasn't like, the normal thing. So to me, I think that's the same thing. You go on Twitter, you see all this negative things about, forced vaccines and travel restrictions, and liberty is dying and all this stuff. And, but to be honest, things are getting better. I mean, one of the biggest unforced errors that I think that the authoritarians did in 2020 was to shut down the schools. And I think that the fact that they shut down the schools and their kids did fine and thrived and were able to learn, and or went to school on Zoom and or whatever, I think, and I'm talking as someone who doesn't have any kids, so I'm probably not the biggest expert on this. You're probably better off talking to a parent with children who went through this. But to me, I feel like the fact that we showed the world that these public school teachers are just they don't care about the kids. They just they're LARPers or whatever, and your kids can do just fine learning and thriving and being much happier having a much happier childhood with their hanging out with their parents more rather than being off in some prison for 6 or 7 hours a day. I think that things are getting better. I mean, if you look objectively at, say, something simple like gun laws, you look at the gun laws in America in the 1950s and you compare it to the gun laws here, they're way better now. More and more places every day are switching to constitutional carry. They're lifting restrictions. You look at something like homeschooling or something like that. Homeschooling was a very taboo subject in 1950s America, and it was probably illegal in like 48 states or 40 something states to even homeschool. But now it's like almost every state allows for homeschooling. And some are more permissive than others, some are more restrictive than others, but the trends are actually going in the right direction. This is what people always like to look at the downside, the doom and gloom. We've had these gold bugs, which I guess you consider yourself to be a part of that, who've been crying wolf about hyperinflation for forever, and it's not coming, or it hasn't came yet. That doesn't mean it's not coming. It could still be coming, but we may never get that hyperinflation, at least not in America. We may just get to me, I see a slow moving trend without a big collapse towards a Bitcoin standard. And I think we kind of saw that in El Salvador. We just always, to parrot what I heard Austrian economist Peter St. Onge say recently, he said that we always assumed that going to Bitcoin would be a collapse, but El Salvador showed us that no, it doesn't have to be a collapse. It could just be, we're adopting Bitcoin tomorrow. And the same thing may happen in America. We may not need a collapse. We're not a doomsday cult, guys. We're not rooting for the world to go to hell. We want good things for everybody. We care about people. That's why we're libertarians. It's not because we're selfish. It's because we want people to thrive. And I do think that things are getting better, although the perception is the opposite. So hopefully that wasn't too controversial of a take.
No, I love that. Yeah, I love that too. And I think it's really refreshing. And it kind of goes back to this idea of like whatever you focus on in your life will become reality to some sort. I'm not like a person that believes in The Secret, and that nonsense. But I mean, it's true. If I focus on myself being a piece of shit, I'll probably act like a piece of shit. If I focus on myself being a good, helpful person to others, I'll be a lot more successful in doing that. And it's really specifically with the gun laws that you brought up. A lot of people don't talk about that, and it's not very convenient for the NRA, and other groups that are trying to raise money, for that to be, common knowledge. But I do want to throw in one jab at Texas, and Texas just recently passed constitutional carry, which kind of shows how much of a LARPer state that is. But
yeah, been saying the same thing. They, it's funny because I was talking to a couple that was moving from Texas, and they were like considering moving to Massachusetts, and I was like, well, why are you moving to Massachusetts? They're like, oh, for work. And I'm like, well, why don't you could live in New Hampshire and commute to work in Massachusetts. And then I was talking about the gun laws, comparing Texas to New Hampshire. And I'm like, you got to understand, New Hampshire's gun laws make Texas look like California. And they said, yeah, but there's one problem with that. I'm like, what is that? It's like, New Hampshire's not filled with Texans. So, as in, Texans are always, spoiling for a fight, or they're always looking to get into a gunfight or whatever. So in New Hampshire maybe is more laid back and chill, whereas Texas is, a bunch of Texans who are, there to go into a bar and get into an argument with someone. So, but yeah, absolutely right. And even now with their constitutional carry, I still think the laws in New Hampshire are pretty good, because I think it only costs $10 to get a permit here in New Hampshire, and it's optional. Obviously, it's optional because it's constitutional carry. So it only costs like $10, and you get your permit in like 15 days. I do have the permit. The reason why I got it is because some states will recognize it. So if I travel to another state like Florida, if I have that permit, it's actually pretty good to have. So even though it's optional, I still think it's a good idea to get the permit. Super cheap and super fast.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. It's the same issue that we have in Arizona, going over to New Mexico or Yeah, some of the California sure doesn't recognize that.
No, no. But that might change. You know, we never know if someone brings the right case, because if you're not a resident of Massachusetts, even though Massachusetts is pretty much an anti-gun state, if you're not a resident of Massachusetts, you can at least apply to get a permit in Massachusetts. You don't have to be a resident. You can apply for a non-resident permit. California does not allow that. So if I reside in another state and I'm visiting California, so I just lose, like they have to at least have a way to apply. I feel like that there might be a case there. I'm probably not going to be the one to bring it, but there might be a case there where California should at least go through the motions and say, yes, if you're a non-resident and you're visiting California, you can apply for a permit. You can do it in, New Hampshire. You can apply for a non-resident permit in New Hampshire if you don't live here. And a lot of states do allow that. I think maybe even New York, I believe, as anti-gun as New York is, I believe in New York at least allows you to apply. They're probably going to deny you, but they will at least, say, yeah, here's the application if you want to apply.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll change. Maybe because they are. I think the funny headline that I saw regarding gun laws was, do you lose your Bill of Rights protections if you're not at home? If you leave your house, do you lose your First Amendment right? Do you lose your Second Amendment? Apparently, everyone's arguing, yeah, you lose if you leave your house, you are no longer protected by the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment only applies when you're in your house, and that's just kind of a patently absurd standard. And I'm hoping somebody challenges that, and all these restrictions on gun laws go away.
Yeah. I'm just so excited about deterrence dispensed and what those guys are doing, because I think it's a similar idea as Bitcoin, where we use technology to really protect our freedoms.
Yeah, that's kind of the theme of the sovereign individual. Is I think society kind of moves forward not through people suddenly, realizing that there's a better way to do things, but from technology allowing, all these great things to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a great premise. I mean, yeah, where's
yeah. No, what was the company you just mentioned? I don't think I was too familiar with them.
Deterrence Dispense. That's Cody Wilson's company.
Oh, Deterrence. Okay, because I had heard of this Defense Distributed, but I hadn't heard of Deterrence. Is that the same thing, or?
Yeah, maybe I messed up the name.
Okay, yeah, Defense. I heard of Defense Distributed, but maybe Cody Wilson has Deterrence. Maybe they have two companies. I don't know.
Defense Distributed. I might have messed it up. Yeah.
Defense Distributed was very cool. Yeah, Cody Wilson. He also, early on, very much into Bitcoin. Him and Amir Taki were very much working on Bitcoin. I don't know what he's doing with Bitcoin these days, but absolutely, Cody Wilson. I was supposed to meet Cody Wilson at Acapulco, Mexico, back in 2015, because I went to that conference, and he was supposed to be there. So I was looking forward to meeting him in person, but he didn't. He said he didn't want to leave the United States, but so he couldn't show up. So unfortunately, I've never got a chance to meet him in person.
Yeah, I could see why he wouldn't want to leave the U.S. He could be a target. So
yeah,
Mexico is very anti-gun in a lot of ways.
Well, I think for him, the issue wasn't so much that he was going to be targeted in Mexico, but he didn't want to run into any issues coming back. And I don't know. I can't speak for him, but that was my understanding. But it could be what you thought too. But yeah, Defense Distributed, absolutely. Cody Wilson. That's the way to do it. Is with technology, kind of making the First and Second Amendment the same thing. That's kind of the tact he took. And yeah, that's the way to do it. Absolutely. You don't ask for permission. You kind of force the issue. And I think that's what Bitcoin is doing. Bitcoin is forcing the issue. And so is a lot of technologies. They're kind of forcing the issue.
Yeah. Where are some good places people can follow your work?
Yeah, you can just follow me on Twitter. Is probably the best place, at Bitcoin Motorist on Twitter. I do have a YouTube channel, but I haven't really done much with it in years. I have a few old videos on the YouTube channel, but yeah, YouTube channel is also under my name, Bitcoin Motorist. But yeah, and I'll be moderating a panel or two at an upcoming conference in Ensenada, Mexico, Ugly Old Goats Conference. So check out that conference if you can be in the area in August. I believe it's August 12th to the 15th. Go check out that conference. If you go to my Twitter page, there's an actual a discount, a 15% discount. You can get to the conference if you use that link on my Twitter page. And the conference fee includes a hotel. So
Right.
people asking me like, oh, like what about the hotel? I'm like, no, that includes the conference and the hotel. They're both included, and they'll pick you up from the airport too. So if you're flying into, say, Tijuana, they'll send a van to pick you up, so you don't have to worry about getting to the venue either. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm going to be. I'm going to be in Baja California in August. Moderating some conferences, moderating some panels at Ugly Old Goats Conference. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm really excited about that. Yeah, I'm my DMs are open. So if anyone has any specific questions, feel free to reach out to me on DMs. I'm pretty good at responding to them.
Yeah, I think I'm busy in August, but I was looking up it's only a 6.5 hour drive from Tucson, which I think is pretty. I need to spend more time in Mexico. With our Phoenix meetup that we have, we kind of have an ongoing joke of um, having a race to see who would buy the Baja Peninsula first.
Yeah, actually, I do think Baja California is like the best part of Mexico. Obviously Mexico could be dangerous. I mean, we know that there's crime that happens there, but I feel like Baja California is safer. One of the reasons why is because there's basically one highway going in and there's one highway that goes down the middle of the peninsula. And that highway is monitored by the Mexican military, which you may think is bad, but it's actually good. You don't want the federales or the local municipal police monitoring that highway. You want the Mexican national military doing it, because those guys are, they're less likely to be, to be locals who kind of know the local, gangs and stuff. And they may just be some 18, 19-year-old dudes who are just standing there doing their job. And I mean, if we had a military checkpoint in America, we'd all be screaming about how unconstitutional this is unfair, blah, blah, blah. But in Mexico, it's a different feel. You want to have a military checkpoint to make sure the cartel is not going down the peninsula.
Well, we do have military checkpoints of some sort in Arizona with the Border Patrol.
Yep, I've heard about that. I thought about driving through those just to fuck with them, but I'm like, I don't know.
I don't mess with them too much. I know people that do, but they start getting to asking me too many questions. I just tell them.
I think it was Mark Edge, a Free Stater, who actually drove through one of them. I don't know if it was in Arizona or New Mexico, but he actually drove through one of the Border Patrol checkpoints, and he recorded it. And they were asking him questions, and Mark Edge was pretty funny. He was like, "Do you have a reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed a crime over and over again?" It was pretty good. He actually did pretty well in that checkpoint, because they're like, "Dude, fuck this guy, wave him through."
Yeah, they've got these weird cameras that they always shine at the car. I don't know what they are to probably see inside of it. Hopefully, it's not some sort of X-ray. But that would be a bummer, getting cancer from Border Patrol. But
actually, we have that issue here in New Hampshire too. On every year on the way to Pork Fest, not on the way up, because Pork Fest is kind of close to the Canadian border, so it's like north of where I live. Not on the way to, but on the way back from Pork Fest, they used to report that there was Border Patrol checkpoints coming back. Although we haven't had them, from what I've heard, in the last 2 or 3 years, but they did used to have, and so we would communicate like through Telegram or sometimes through CB radio. To say, hey, has anyone seen a checkpoint? Like, if we want to avoid the checkpoint, which way we should go to try to route around it if there was a Border Patrol checkpoint. But thankfully, we haven't had those in the last 2-3 years. Maybe because we Free Staters have been spotting them and communicating with each other to warn people to go around them.
Yeah. I mean, man, now that you mentioned the Canadian border, we might have a refugee crisis of people fleeing Canada here pretty soon.
Yeah. Absolutely. I feel so bad for people who live in places like Canada and Australia. I can't imagine going through that. New Zealand, it's just I used to be like, yeah, I want to go visit Australia. I want to go visit New Zealand. I don't want to fucking go to Australia or New Zealand anymore. No fucking way would I go there. At least not without some huge changes.
Yeah. Well, I don't even think we can get into those countries. I mean, the UK is just bonkers too. Seems like the entire most of Europe is wild right now.
Yeah.
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 Well, really appreciate you coming on the podcast. This is a lot of fun.
It was a blast. Thank you so much for having me on, Alex. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks again, Patrick. Hopefully I'll see you at PorcFest or one of these conferences coming up.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll see you around. We'll hit the circuit. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I really enjoyed that conversation with the Bitcoin Motorist. I really appreciated his optimism kind of towards the end of the conversation about how we are actually growing more free. And I think that's something that's important to highlight. There's a lot of awful stuff happening right now in regards to, ESG movement, vaccine passports. We just got out of a year of lockdowns. But in some ways, we're freer than we've ever been. And I think we're progressing forward as humanity. And it's so great to have something like Bitcoin that is such a strong way to protect individual liberties and rights. And I think we live truly at a pivotal point in human history in a really exciting time. So yeah, big thank you to Bitcoin Motorist. Definitely encourage you to go follow him on Twitter. I always enjoy reading the stuff that he's talking about, and have a good one.